I'm not sure if this is the right place to post this, but I'm scared shitless. After hearing stories and looking stuff up online, I'm fairly sure it was a Wendigo. Me, my son, and girlfriend were attacked by something. We were camping up in the northernmost area of Washington. My girlfriend is incredibly superstitious, so she insisted we bring weapons. So I had my combat knife and a 12-gauge shotgun with me, and she brought a .22 rifle alongside a newly sharpened machete. Our son was only 3 years at the time. She and I were set on the edge from a park ranger who seemed very tense and uneasy to begin with, who stopped us and instead of confiscating our weapons told us to be careful and stay safe, then sent us along our way to the camp. When we got there, we were informed that several visitors had spoken about some unnatural noises and a pale creature that would mimic voices and sounds of people who weren't talking or seeming to be distracted. I laughed and put the idea out of my mind, thinking to myself that there's no way, they're just fucking with us, but I knew better. So, when we reached the area we were going to set up camp, we immediately got a fire ready to light and set up our tent and bags. I fed my son as my girlfriend ate a snack. We decided to get a lay of the area, so me and my girlfriend hiked around for about an hour or so. I had one of those baby carrying backpacks and my son started to get real heavy about now. Everything seemed normal until I saw something down the almost path we were on. We walked closer to investigate and saw drag marks. It looked as if something had killed a buck. There was a whole outline in the dirt with a small dried pool of blood, as if someone grabbed it from the antlers and pulled. That wouldn't be possible for any man to do. The buck, or whatever it was, would have been way too big for that. Shaken, we rushed back to base camp and restarted the fire and hurried back into our tent. Too afraid to leave since it was dusk by now, we stayed inside the tent and my girlfriend put our son to bed. Eventually, probably from the exhaustion of fright, we fell asleep. What must have been hours later, I awoke to a faint rasping sound that sounded like a child crying. I gazed outside in confusion and saw the outline of a creature that seemed to be a buck, standing over something. It seemed to be about 20 feet away, but at a closer glance had unnaturally long limbs for a buck and was eerily tall. In sudden fear, I unloaded 2 shots into the creature and heard a loud, blood-curdling cry. My girlfriend awoke screaming to the shots I had fired as I tried to explain what I had heard, but to my surprise, the animal hadn't even moved an inch. And then I noticed the stains on the side of the animal. It looked like blood was running down the edge, and lots of it. It stared at me, deep into my eyes as I became petrified with fear. A sinister feeling of dread fell over me, as if it knew I couldn't move. I thought to myself, what if it starts to bolt toward us? And just then, this tall, decrepit, demonic thing seemed to whisper something. And I couldn't exactly tell what it was saying, but it seemed to have a, I need more. I need more children. My girlfriend screamed, asking where our son was. We blacked out. In the morning, we awoke to park rangers at our campsite. We didn't see our son anywhere, and we told the rangers that he was missing, and they started up a search party. I explained what had happened, and strangely, they seemed to believe it. The one who seemed to be older, by at least a decade, pulled along the one we met earlier and whispered in his ear. I only heard a single line, and I'm not even sure if what I heard was correct. It sounded like he said, "It's getting bolder." They didn't seem to want us by ourselves, so they waited with us while they continued the search. We stayed in a log cabin for 3 days with a forest ranger, when suddenly some rangers came into the cabin saying they could not find our son. My girlfriend started sobbing. I started to hate myself, thinking I could have done something if I wasn't frozen in fear. We rushed outside only to find some injured and frightened police officials. The rangers wouldn't tell us anything of what happened or what they saw, or why the cops were scared shitless. All we know is we don't have our son anymore. God help whoever goes into that forest next, and please don't bring your kids with you. Growing up in the mountains of North Georgia, camping and hiking were things me and my brother did so often it was second nature to us. So, anytime Ryan and I had a break from school, we would head straight for the woods. We packed our gear, let our parents know we were going, and that was that, no questions asked. We decided to camp about midways through Jack's River Trail in Coolwater Wilderness, and it's a trail we knew fairly well, as we had used a few times before to practice long hikes on. We arrived at the trailhead around lunchtime, parked the car, got out our gear, and headed into the woods. We passed a few hikers and moved along and asked them how the trail looked, and the answer was always the same: wet. Jack's River Trail probably crossed the river 50 times as it went along its 17-mile-plus journey, and with the colder temperatures of late fall settling in, it was harder for the trail to stay dry. We moved deeper into the trail and started to look for a place to make camp. This is where Ryan and I made our first mistake. You see, Ryan and I have this rule: we don't camp near people if at all possible. Call us paranoid, but the last thing we want is for someone to drag us out of our tents into the woods to never be seen again. So we always camped a pretty decent ways off the trail and in an area that wasn't popular with overnight camping. Roughly 2.5 hours or so, we found what we thought was a perfect place to set up for 2 nights that we would be out. We came up to Horseshoe Bend and ventured about half a mile off the trail into a clearing and set up. We built a teepee fire late for that night and pitched our tents on either side. After setting up and unloading, we decided to walk back to the trail and go exploring around some of the many swimming holes Jack River has to offer. This was during Thanksgiving break, and I remember being surprised at how few people were on the trail. Maybe it was the weather, or the fact that it was early in the week, but there didn't seem to be anyone hiking, much less staying the night. Around 5 o'clock, Ryan and I headed back to camp to start our fire, make dinner, etc., and just settle in for the night. As soon as the sun began to set, the cold rushed in. We added more wood to the fire, sat close, and just enjoyed conversation. Ryan was 2 years behind me in school. I was a senior and he was only a sophomore, but growing up, we had always been close. We always hung out in the same groups and played the same sports, had the same hobbies, etc. Around 9, we were settled comfortably around the fire. I had just texted our mom to let her know we were safe and getting ready for bed, and I remember we were talking about dreading going to our grandparents' house for Thanksgiving and having the same awkward conversations we would have each year with family we only saw on holidays when things started to get strange. We were no stranger to sounds in these woods, since the woods alone are full of animals and critters, from deer to black bears, even the random wild boar. If you are in the woods enough, you learn to distinguish certain sounds, and what we were hearing I can only chalk up to as odd. What Ryan and I heard was what sounded like someone sneaking around slowly, just out of eyesight. With an animal walking on 4 legs, you hear a tight group of steps, but what we were hearing sounds very distinct to what a human sounds like when walking slowly, or trying to move without making too much sound. I remember we both pulled out our flashlights and shone it in the direction we felt sounds were coming from. But that is just what was so weird. Whenever we would fix our lights on a spot, we thought the sound was coming from the location we shined on, and then the sound location would suddenly change. It was as if there were multiple people walking around us, and that's when the whistling started. At first I thought it was the wind, and I remember thinking maybe the wind is just throwing leaves around, and what we were hearing is nothing but the wilderness around us. Ryan looked at me and asked if I was hearing that. I didn't answer and was trying to focus hard on each individual sound. 2 consecutive notes with roughly a 3 to 4 second gap, and then 2 more consecutive notes, over and over again. Ryan kept asking if I heard that, and I put my finger to my lips trying to keep him from talking. The fear I felt was incredible. My jaws were tightened, my fists clenched, knowing I wasn't ready for whatever was out there, if it was anything at all. The whistling continued for what felt like forever, but thinking it through was maybe 5 minutes with Ryan finally yelled out through the darkness, "Hey!" Quiet. The whistling had stopped. The crunching of wood stopped. Nothing. I was pissed. I looked at Ryan with a "what the hell" look, and he shrugged his shoulders. "I had to do something," he said. I just shook my head. We sat there in silence for a few minutes when the woods erupted with noise. Something, or someone, was running in a circle around our campsite. The whistling came back. 2 consecutive notes with the same 3 to 4 second gap, and then 2 more consecutive notes. How could someone whistle this loudly without cracking while also running? I was done. I stood up, shining my flashlight in all directions, just trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was screwing with us. But nothing. It felt close enough to touch, but we never saw a thing. And that's when the movement stopped, but the whistling was still constant. It was so loud, inhumanly loud. I looked at Ryan and told him to call the police now. Now this is the part that I will never forget, the part that I never like to talk about. While Ryan was on the phone with the dispatcher and telling them our location and what was going on, I stepped around the fire towards my tent. Inside my bag, I had a 6-inch fixed blade that I always carried and thought I would feel a bit more comfortable with it in my hand, more than just my flashlight. As I went to unzip my tent, trying to keep my eyes towards the woods, I heard some movement directly in front of me. I swept my light up in front of me, and maybe 2 seconds I saw it. Whatever this person was or thing was, it was about 5 feet up in a tree. Everything about it was long. Its arms, legs, neck, fingers, everything. And it was fast. As soon as the light launched backwards off the tree, I heard it land, but it either jumped on an impossible distance or landed in a thicket, because I heard it but never saw. I don't think I have ever yelled so loud. I ran back to where Ryan was and sat down. He kept asking me what I saw, but I just couldn't answer. I just kept thinking about what I had seen. And maybe 10 minutes later, we saw a couple of flashlight beams coming through the woods, and about 3 guys had come into view asking if everything was okay. I settled a bit and started asking them if they had seen or heard anything. All they said was they heard a lot of movement and then heard my scream, and that's when they headed in our direction. I tried to explain what had happened without sounding crazy, but it didn't seem to work. One of the guys walked around a bit and came back and said he didn't see anything at all. Ryan told them that we called the police, and roughly 30 minutes later, the park ranger had finally shown up. Ryan and I tried explaining everything to him, but he just chalked it up to either a curious animal or some campers trying to mess with us. Either way, Ryan and I decided we weren't staying the night, and we packed up our stuff and walked out of the woods with the ranger. He took our statement and we got into the car and drove home. Ryan and I don't talk about what happened that night, but neither of us have been back to Jack's River Trail and will probably never go back. I need to talk about this encounter somewhere where people will finally know my story. On Thursday, February 17th, 2017, at around 1600 to 1700, I believe, I spotted a Wendigo in a wooded area behind my residence. I live in an area where Wendigos could have been spotted, so I don't deny that it was a Wendigo. Anyway, I have found mutilated animals and horrible scenes of death, rot, and decay that would make even the well-seasoned veterans throw up. The sights have just been horrifying, and this really supports my theory that something is back in those woods. For example, about 1 month ago I found my second dead fox. Its head and spinal cord were about 30 feet downhill from the mangroves mess that was once a body. Its body had its front left leg ripped off and large scratches in its chest and sides. Furthermore, it was disemboweled with its intestinal tract in the trees and bushes. There were also signs of struggle because from fur from another animal and some sort of black liquid were on the ground under its nails. Now, I'm leaving out a lot of the details, but those should paint a pretty good picture for you. Now, the juicy part of my experience with this terrible spirit. So let me lay out the land for you. My house is about 100 yards from a small stream that splits the small wooded area in half, and on the far side of the stream from my house, there are large trees. So I was out there one day, and all of a sudden I felt cold and uncomfortable, kind of like I was being watched. I also became increasingly paranoid that someone or something was out there with me, so I decided to head in. Plus, the sun was setting and dusk would be upon me soon. So I started walking towards my house, which would mean I would have to walk uphill. So I start walking at first, and I was walking out of the woods like I was on someone's yard and they had told me to get off. Not a fast pace, but moving with a purpose, you know. Then I kind of felt like someone was really looking at me. So I turned around and saw a large creature about 80 or so yards away from me standing across the stream. It then proceeded to take a step towards me. And I'm not really too athletic, but I'm not mega weak either. I would say that if I had to run about 20 yards uphill through the woods, it might take me about 30 to 40 seconds. Yeah, I ran out of those woods in about 10 seconds. It is the most I have ever been scared in my life, and the most adrenaline has ever flowed through me. Now I know what you're wondering. Could I have been dehydrated or having hallucinations? Well, I've never hallucinated once in my life, and I wasn't dehydrated because about 10 minutes prior to this event, I drank an entire bottle of water, and I always make sure I'm hydrated before I go woodland exploring. And there's no way it was a tree because every time I go out there, I go to where I spotted it, and there isn't a single small tree enough to remotely even look like what I saw. Since then, I haven't spotted it, but I can hear it. It is believed by Native Americans that wendigos call out for help like a human in order to lure people toward it. I have heard what it sounds like a little girl calling for help out in those woods before. It is still terrifying to talk or think about. Could anyone please help me or tell me that I'm not crazy? My wife and I have been running that rat race for years, with a family, a house in the city, 2 dogs, a cat, the stereotypical American dream. But the city did take its toll, and the neighborhood got worse. The crime rose, and we even found ourselves looking for a way out. Our opportunity came when I was offered a new job out of state. It was a great career move, but we didn't want to move to a new city just to have the same problems again. So we started looking around and found a great mountain community about an hour and a half from the job, and a great ranch-style house with a big back porch, windows everywhere, and a lot of property. The backyard has a big grassy area and a creek that cuts the property in half, and then acres of woods beyond. I mean, it's huge. The house is more than twice the size of our house in the city. It's all updated and has no neighbors within a mile. It's a radical change from the life we lived in the city, but best of all, it was less than half of what we were paying for our old house. The house was a foreclosure, and when we asked the listing agent about it, she simply said the old family had abandoned the property. We really didn't think anything of it since those kinds of things happen like that all the time in apartment complexes when people don't have the ability to pay rent anymore. The first 3 months were pretty uneventful, with us settling into our new life, and the kids getting used to the new school and new friends, and most of all, us getting used to the big house and property. But then the weather turned cold and things started to get weird. It started with noises from the back property, things we chalked up to being in the woods. Then the motion lights around the house started going off randomly, and once again, we just chalked it up to being in the woods. But last night, that all changed. Last night was the most terrifying night of my life. One of the dogs was at the back door whining and scratching, and I just assumed he needed to go to the bathroom, so I grabbed my flashlight and walked out the back door. Instantly, something felt off. The dog bolted for the back property, growling and snarling. It was a cold night, about 30 degrees, but the dog plunged straight into the creek and out the other bank, running off into the woods in the back of the property. Flashlight bouncing, I ran after him, calling his name. I got to the creek and made my way across the makeshift bridge, trying desperately to follow him. I could hear the dog still growling and barking from somewhere up ahead, and I pushed further away from the safety of the house and deeper into the woods. And that's when I heard it, a shriek like I've never heard before in my life. It was a mix of a moaning wail and metal on metal. It echoed through the trees and froze me in my very tracks. My dogs bounded its way back to me and cowered down behind me. I turned around and could just make out the warm glow of the house behind me and the cold, dark ahead of me. I swung my flashlight around wildly, looking for the source of the noise, and that's when I heard an even more terrifying noise. Out of the cold silence, my wife's voice floated all around me. "Babe," the voice called out. I whipped back around and the noise could just barely make out the image of my wife, safely inside of her house. The voice called out again. "Babe, I'm right here," came the voice from deeper into the woods. Then came another voice, just as clear as the other, and it was my dad's voice. "Come out here," it called. I swung the flashlight around again, and this time caught the briefest glint of light bouncing off of eyes. The creature was in the beam of light for barely a second, but it was tall, maybe 6 feet, and ashen white. It had long, spindly fingers that grasped the trunk of a pine tree, and then it was gone. I turned back and ran towards the house. I ran headlong into the icy creek and stumbled. My dog ran past me, making it back to the yard and up the porch. I dug my hands into the freezing, muddy bank and pulled myself out, not stopping to even look back. When I reached the porch, I scrambled inside. My wife frantically ran over to me, asking what had happened. I just shook my head. I'm not certain myself what had happened. I had a growing sense of dread tonight as the sun began to fall. We kept the dogs inside and I haven't dared to look out the back. But as I sit here typing, one by one, my motion lights in the backyard keep going off. I'm the sort of person who is skeptical of any claims regarding the existence of the supernatural. My wife claims to see ghosts and dead people and that she's an empath, and I'll concede that she's a very good guesser regarding other people's emotions and the history of places and families. But I can't accept her statements as fact because they're not empirically provable. With that said, you can believe me or not, but what I'm about to say is something that even I have a lot of trouble disbelieving. I can't say I've had any paranormal experiences in my life, but there are several things that happened when I was quite young that I simply can't explain. By the time I was about 12 to 18 months old, I had either a memory or a very vivid imagination of my life before birth. I was floating up in the sky, standing on thin air, with no land in any direction. In front of me was a kindly made, middle-aged Native American man wearing a plain white robe. He asked me if I was ready. Some kind of vision flashed before my eyes when I said yes. I somehow descended and experienced my own birth. Keep in mind that this was before I was able to comprehend what birth was, so I didn't even know about Native Americans yet. When I was about 6 or 7, I started getting very distinct mental images of something extremely disturbing. What I saw was a tanned, mummified-looking, emaciated, dead face. The eyes were glassy but somehow horribly alive, and the lips and nose were shrunken. The creepiest thing about the face was the 2 wide smiles and a full set of very white teeth. When I was 9 or 10, I read for the first time about some expedition or other in the Antarctic where several ill-fated members of an expeditionary group died and were left behind. Their bodies were recovered in the 20th century, and the article I was reading had images of them. I had never seen a frozen body before, but as soon as I saw those pictures, I immediately correlated what I was reading with the thing I'd seen earlier in life. From that point onward, I started having almost real waking visions, in a way that's hard to explain, more than just in my mind's eye, and yet not exactly as if it were actually in front of me, of something that is basically my worst nightmare. It was an 8 to 9 foot tall, and I know this because its head almost touched the ceiling, frozen corpse, completely naked with long arms and legs. It was the same face I'd seen before in my mind, with shrunken features. Only now it had a full body that was just as emaciated and mummified as the head and neck were. I only saw it on cloudy days in the late fall or winter, and always when it was between me and a window, so it was sort of backlit. It never made any motion to do anything, it just stared down at me with a horrible grin. In high school, I got onto Wikipedia at some point and finally learned what the thing was: the Wendigo. For those who don't know, it's a mythical spirit creature. I was born in Connecticut and have about 1% Native American blood in me from about 400 plus years ago. My first traceable ancestors in America came over shortly after the Mayflower, and one of them married a Native American woman. Now do you see the part why I'm so creeped out? Now, according to the legend, the Wendigo was an evil spirit associated with starvation, the winter, and cannibalism. It either lured desperate people into eating their fellow humans during the winter, or possessed those who did resort to cannibalism. There are various stories about how it looked, but most of them agree that it looks like a frozen corpse, generally taller than a human, and no, it doesn't have antlers like in all modern depictions you'll find via Google. It reportedly can ride on the winter wind, mimic human voices to lure the unwary into ambushes, and has a heart made of ice. But here's the thing though, I experienced this before I ever identified what the creature was or knew about the legends. Only after almost a decade of intermittently seeing the Wendigo did I come across this description. This description is from Wikipedia and follows. The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tautly over its bones, with its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody, and unclean and suffering from suppurations of the flesh. The Wendigo gave off a strange and eerie odor of decay, decomposition, decay, and death. I've done my further research, and all of this information I found from various sources all concur what I saw. So I'm remotely linked to the Native Americans with whom the legend oriented. I have always had a deathly fear of dead bodies, especially mummified looking ones, and I saw a creature from their stories long before I learned that what I saw matched the traditional descriptions perfectly. I was and still am skeptical, but even I can ignore these coincidences. I'm also a Christian, and therefore am quite wary of any claims of ghosts or supernatural entities inhabiting the world due to my beliefs. But even so, this thing has stuck with me for years, and I saw it earlier today, which is why I'm here. Anyone got any insight? I've considered seeking out a highly knowledgeable person to figure out what to do, but I'm torn because I also have some reservations about that from a religious perspective. Also, I promise this is sincere and not a fictional account. This has left me feeling extremely shook up, and I'd love some opinions, especially from somebody with other experiences. Last year, I had a very strange experience in National Forest out in California. I was by myself on a road trip with my dog, and I was driving pretty far into Mendocino National Forest. I like to camp in national parks and forests because it's isolate, so my dog can roam, and they're free of charge. A trade-off for sketchy, rough drives into the park sometimes and the lack of service. Anyway, I was driving up this dirt road and kind of curling up a mountain around maybe 5 p.m. It was very nice out, sunny and warm with a slight breeze. Nothing serious happened, but I felt extremely uncomfortable driving into the area, and that feeling did not let up at all. Driving up the mountain, I felt like I shouldn't stay there, and I even texted my boyfriend about it for as long as I could before my phone completely lost service. I was looking for a sign of another person having been around the area lately, but didn't see anything at all. I pulled over and got out of my car with my dog to look over the edge and noticed a dead squirrel and some broken glass mixed in the dirt with gravel road. Yucca, my dog started to growl slightly. She is vocal, but I've almost ever seen her or heard her growl at or with other dogs. I did see her growl at a possum once, so it could be something she smelled maybe? This place continued to make me feel quite on edge, but I pride myself in being an independent traveler and backpacker, so I decided to continue at least a little bit further with me grumbling. This place continued to make me feel quite on edge, but I pride myself in being an independent traveler and backpacker, so I decided to continue at least a little bit further with my grumbling pup to see if I can find a good place to camp. I continue to notice more dead animals. Keep in mind no one is going to be more than 5 to 10 miles up this thing, and that's if there's anyone even there. I hear men's voices though, and they sound close, and I think I should call out to them, so I stop my car, but then I kind of freeze up and feel like I shouldn't. I can't really make my way out of what they're saying, and I don't see any sign of people anywhere, and I get back in my car and continue to slowly drive forward and cautiously look where the voices could be coming from. I've never ran into other people in a national park or forest when I've gone this deep in. The unsettling feeling grows about the voices, which have a sort of come and gone a few times, and I give up and begin to turn my car around. I honestly don't remember how Yucca was acting on the way down. I was scared and focusing on getting out of there. I just distinctly remember being surprised at her grumbling when we were standing outside my car. Kind of dangerously quickly, I went back down the mountain not seeing any sign of anyone, and I decided to spring for luxury and get a hotel for the night. I figured I was just fine. Huge and open spaces can be intimidating, I told myself, and the voices could have been echoing from somewhere far off, and they just sounded close. Animals die, glass gets broken, nothing happened, cool. But I remember this place, it just sticks with me. Whenever I'm watching scary movies, if I'm walking my dog in the woods at night, nothing compares to the feeling I had driving up that mountain, and it's honestly kind of interesting me as well as frightening. I recently happened across some information, as well as some Native American lore that made me feel extremely uneasy. Fast forward a year, I've mentioned this place to a few people and the haunting vibes it gave me, but nothing much more. Googled the national park once and didn't see anything, but didn't look much either. I like scary movies and things of that nature, so my boyfriend and I were coming up on finishing a road trip just yesterday. There were only 2 to 3 hours left and the sun had set, so we decided to listen to some scary podcasts and YouTube videos. We went from the No Sleep podcast to the X-Files and ended up on a True Stories video dealing with Native American lore. I'm half paying attention, petting my dog, playing Pokemon on an emulator, and I hear the narrator mention wendigos. Very briefly says what they are and casually mentions that they can mimic voices. I mean it when I say the most horrible chills I have ever had in my life crawl down my spine, and I stare at my boyfriend and ask him if he remembers that national forest I was freaked out about last year. He says he does, and he reminds me that he texted me. I was probably close to a wendigo. I remember him saying that, but didn't know much more about their lore, and thought he was just being funny, like, yeah, Bigfoot is probably stalking you, or some other dad joke. And he was like, no, I mean, I was mostly joking, but I said it specifically because you said you were hearing voices that you couldn't find a trace of. I feel strange as hell, and I start Googling wendigos. They are allegedly able to mimic human voices and would live in that sort of area. It all matched up. Obviously, there's a ton of questionable info out there, but I tried to more reputable websites and authentic experiences. I then specifically looked up missing persons in the area, and the first headline that catches my eye is, another family goes missing in Mendocino. I went through the different websites and news articles of people going missing, but they are all a little hidden underneath national park websites and pictures of trees. I remember looking up the forest about a year ago and didn't see anything, and realized that these stories didn't seem to be talked about much, which also piqued my intuition. It was stated that well over 100 people in the past 8 years have gone missing and not been found, on top of many which are found dead. It just has my intuition super spiked. I remember just how feeling unsafe I felt and how much I wanted to get out of there, and it just terrifies me. I feel so uneasy about what I was hearing, and to this day, it still bothers me. My dog and I are very close, and she was a stray that started following me one day, and I ended up bringing her home from Costa Rica. So her little growls along the way makes me feel like there was something wrong. Even though it was just a storytelling video, those stories originate from somewhere. I have done a lot of solo traveling, both in and out of the country, and I have never had such a bad feeling, on top of seeing an unnecessary amount of dead animals in a national forest, which just seems strange. I don't think I'll be doing anything more like solo traveling again, unless it's around civilization.